Germany are reporting that Arsenal are keeping an eye on the situation around Leroy Sané and his new contract talks at Bayern Munich. Sané is in talks about extending his deal there beyond his current 2025 expiry, and he's understood to prefer to remain at the club. I mean, Kwaku, Leroy Sané, obviously Bayern Munich, Arsenal keeping an eye on the situation, but can you see a 28-year-old Leroy Sané going to Arsenal and ultimately being a backup for Bukayo Saka?
I think he can be used in multiple positions. Of course, his natural position is on the right-hand side. He's left-footed, and we saw him do that not only for Bayern Munich, but for Man City as well. But we've seen in recent seasons him drift more centrally and play as an advanced number 8 or even a number 10. And if Arsenal to move Declan Rice back into the number 6 position, which they originally brought him in, you can see Sané maybe occupying one of those roles, or maybe giving Odegaard a break, who plays a lot of games as well. And so I don't think he's necessarily going to come there strictly as a backup. We saw Leandro Trossard, obviously he is more of a backup, come to Arsenal and be hugely effective. And for an Arsenal team that are chasing titles, he's going to be the kind of player they need. He's got vast experience now. He's 28 years old. And he's not the Leroy Sané that we saw at Man City that was explosive. Of course, he had that ACL injury at the beginning of the 1920 season that took a little bit away from his game. But he is more powerful. He is stronger now. And I feel like it'd be the perfect sign for Arsenal. Whether it'd be the perfect move for him, who wants to be playing consistent football week in, week out, it remains to be seen. But I think from the Arsenal point of things, I think it'll be a huge sign and a huge boost to their squad.
I mean, you mentioned he's not maybe the explosive player that we saw at Manchester City, but James, if Arsenal do get him, what player would they be getting in Leroy Sané now?
Well, he's somebody that we know plenty about from his time in the Premier League, and Mikel Arteta knows plenty about, having worked with him at Manchester City. He signed for City 8 years ago, back in 2016. He was actually one of Pep Guardiola's first signings. Enjoyed a huge amount of success in Manchester. 7 trophies in total, including 2 Premier League titles, 25 goals in just 90 games. And averaged an assist every 3 games as well. So it was absolutely devastating going forward, in particular for those 2 seasons in between. It was 4 years there. First season wasn't so brilliant, Pep's first season. Last season, as you mentioned, Kwaku had that injury. But then he decided he wanted to move elsewhere and head back to Germany to join Bayern Munich, where he scored more goals, recorded more assists, but clearly across more matches. But he did struggle in the second half of last season, as did the whole team, really. They failed to win the Bundesliga the first time in more than a decade. His last league goal came in October, so he failed to have a real impact at the back end of last season, and also didn't really make much of an impact on the Euro 2024 campaign with Germany.
Dan, does this fit in with how Arsenal have been doing things lately, especially under Mikel Arteta?
Yeah, well, I think when we look at Arsenal's business, I mean, it's all about how can they get those marginal gains against Manchester City, because we know they lost the title by 1 point last season, so where can they make those gains? I mean, Mikel Arteta said yesterday evening that, they won't be in the market for the same sort of price or player as Declan Rice last summer, so they won't be spending £100 million on one player. Would Leroy Sané represent a different type of signing with 1 year left on his contract? We were talking about this, what ballpark figure would we be looking at, 40, 50 million potentially? Maybe that is the marginal gain that could see Arsenal get those extra 2 points to beat Manchester City to the title.
What Arteta does also like is Premier League proven players. Look at Kai Havertz, look at David Raya, look at Jorginho, Trossard, players who've played in this league already. And so Sané, of course, he's gone to Bayern Munich, has been there for a while now, but he understands what the Premier League is about in terms of physicality, and he's put on that extra weight. And so he'd fit in absolutely perfectly. Like you mentioned there, though, it's the price. 1 year left in his contract, is quite difficult to negotiate that, especially with a player that wants to stay at Bayern Munich. And so that will remain to be seen. But I think that Leroy Sané, at this point in his career, would be perfect for Arsenal. And like you say, give them those marginal gains, because they're getting closer and closer to City every season, and he might be the player to push them over the top.
I mean, Dan, they're being linked again, Leroy Sané, another winger. So does that mean Arsenal are happy with their striker options?
It feels like all we talked about last season was Arsenal need a striker, Arsenal need a forward, whether that's instead of Gabriel Jesus or to support him a bit more with Eddie Nketiah still there as well. That was well before Kai Havertz really made a name for himself through the middle for Arsenal, because he started as a midfielder last year, as we saw. Kai Havertz had a really strong second half of the season. He was in double digits goals and assists in his last 14 Premier League games. Gabriel Jesus didn't get to double figures in goals and assists all season. So it feels like they found someone in Havertz to play that position. And I think it is very interesting that all the signings we've been talking about around Arsenal, potential targets, are not strikers. They're kind of around the team. But I think to what Kwaku was saying about Sané, I think when you look at all the top teams at the moment, they're all aiming for players or targeting players who are versatile, who can play 2 or 3 different positions. It isn't about maybe having the numbers in the squad. It's having players who are very versatile, who can play across 2, 3, 4 positions.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Emile Smith-Rowe is heading to Fulham in a deal worth £34 million. Now, Kwaku, after everything that's happened with Emile Smith-Rowe, all of his injuries, you're excited about this move for him and seeing him in a Fulham shirt, aren't you?
Yeah, he's a player that affects winning. And if you take your mind back to the 2021 season where him and Saka really saved Arsenal, it's easy to forget how good of a player he was, given the number 10 shirt at Arsenal as well. And there's a really good article on the Sky Sports website by Nick Wright, where he details how his Smith-Rowe's Arsenal dream faded. But also points out a stat that in that 2021 season, Arsenal had a 67% win rate with Smith-Rowe starting. That plummeted to 30% when he wasn't starting. So at a team like Fulham, where you have a bit more freedom and also have the guarantee of playing football week in, week out, you expect him to thrive. And I am excited for him and for Fulham as well, who are making some really exciting signings in this window. And he's a player that if he does get that confidence back, we can maybe see him return to form of 3 or 4 years ago. Because I remember he was on fire, wasn't he? Arsenal had the chart with him and Saka, and he seemed like he was going to set the world alight. And unfortunately, injuries coincided with Arsenal's upturn in form, and he's been kind of the forgotten man at the football club. But I think at Fulham, he'll be a great fit.
I mean, James, he was highly rated. He is highly rated by Mikel Arteta. Letting him go wouldn't have been an easy decision, would it?
No, it's always sad letting an academy graduate go, and I think Mikel Arteta has a real affinity with him because of what he did in the early years of Arteta's regime. Him and Saka sort of single-handedly increased the morale and gave Arsenal fans hope about what may be possible when many thought that Arteta perhaps wasn't the right man or that this Arsenal project wasn't going anywhere. But unfortunately, due to injuries and because of how Arsenal have evolved with the signings they've made and the progress they've made, he's just not featured. 346 minutes he played in the Premier League last season, 164 the season before, and it's hard to see him getting that many opportunities, though we know he's got such great ability, comfortable with both feet, great at carrying the ball forward, has got a goal in him, has got an assist in him as well. So despite the fact he was so excellent for Arsenal early on, it feels like Arsenal have moved on now, as sad as that is to say, and it feels like it's time for Smith-Rowe to move on as well. I really do think this works for all parties if this deal gets done, because Smith-Rowe gets an opportunity to be a talisman at a club in Fulham. Fulham have had a really difficult summer so far with the players they've let go. But for Arsenal to get a fee like that, around £35 million, it could eventually go on to be, for someone who's barely featured for them for the last 2 seasons, it is really good business and really helps them for a PSR perspective.
And Dan, for Fulham as well, potential record signing if this goes through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we all watched Fulham a bit last season, and at times they were scintillating. I mean, they were playing kind of the football of the weekend. Sometimes they had some fantastic results under Marco Silva last season as well. And I think why I like this move for Smith-Rowe, as you mentioned, it's quite rare that a deal maybe looks like on paper it works for all parties. And I think Marco Silva has shown at Fulham that perhaps players who weren't given opportunities at their clubs or needed that first team football, like the likes of Andres Pereira or Adama Traore, had some really good moments last season after leaving Wolves. Rodrigo Muniz, I mean, I don't think many of us knew about him before he was scintillating in the second half of the season. So Marco Silva, maybe a different style to Arteta, but has shown he can improve players in a different way and also maybe give them that arm around the shoulder, give them a new home, and hopefully Smith-Rowe can have exactly that at Fulham.
Yeah, exciting times for Fulham.
Thank you for watching. See you the next video.